Most people live under the illusion that what moves the world is effort, or resources, or even raw intelligence. But when you look beneath the surface, when you dig into the real engine behind breakthroughs, behind healing, behind endurance, you'll always find one foundational force at work: faith. Not just faith in general, but positive faith. The kind of faith that expects something good, even when evidence says otherwise. The kind of faith that energizes your action and gives meaning to your persistence. Because faith is not a luxury of the spiritual, it is the starting point of every forward step. Nothing significant is ever achieved without faith going before it. Whether it's building a business, healing a broken relationship, restoring health, or changing the direction of your life, it all begins in that invisible, often unspoken, but deeply powerful belief that this can change. I can do this. God is not done with me yet. And without that belief, action becomes hollow. You go through the motions, but your heart isn't in it. You show up, but your spirit is already retreating. What gives energy to your action is the belief that it matters, that it's not wasted, that what you do in faith will bring something better, and that belief, my friend, is faith in motion. You don't need a dramatic miracle to know that God is with you. Sometimes, the greatest evidence of God's presence is simply the courage you feel in your chest when everything around you says give up. Sometimes, it's the quiet peace that tells you, take one more step, even when you can't see the end of the road. That's what positive faith does. It moves you when reason stalls. It carries you when your feelings fade, and it roots you when fear tries to knock you off your foundation. It doesn't make the journey easy, but it makes it possible. Because faith is not the absence of struggle, it's the refusal to be defeated by it. There are people who spend their entire lives waiting to feel strong before they take action. But strength doesn't precede faith, faith precedes strength. You act not because you feel certain, but because you trust that God is working behind the scenes. You move not because everything is lined up, but because you believe that as you move, the way will be made. That's the kind of inner conviction that changes lives. That's the kind of belief that lifts a person from ordinary existence into extraordinary purpose. It's easy to talk about faith when things are going well. But positive faith reveals its power when things are unclear, when you're waiting on an answer, when your prayers haven't been answered yet, when others have moved on, and you're still holding the vision. That's when faith becomes more than an idea. It becomes your lifeline. Let's take a moment to clarify something. Positive faith is not about denying reality. It's not pretending that trouble doesn't exist. It's about choosing to believe in a higher truth in the middle of your reality. It's not blind. It sees the facts clearly, but it places its confidence in something greater than the facts. In other words, it knows that the facts are not the final word. When your faith is grounded in a positive expectation of good, and I don't mean fantasy, but hope based in divine purpose you find the resilience to keep sowing even when the harvest is far off. You find the strength to keep loving even when love isn't returned. You find the clarity to make decisions without all the answers because you trust the one who holds the future. This is the quiet revolution of positive faith. It turns the smallest act into a sacred investment. You make that phone call, you apply again, you forgive, you keep building, and while none of those acts may seem remarkable to the world, to heaven they are the signs of a person refusing to let fear have the final say. That kind of person doesn't just change their life, they change the lives around them. Faith is contagious. When others see someone walking forward with quiet strength, they feel something awaken in themselves too. They start to believe that maybe they can try again, that maybe they're not as stuck as they thought, that maybe hope isn't foolish after all. You don't need to be loud to live by faith, you just need to be committed. Faith isn't always a shout, sometimes it's a whisper that refuses to die. It's the soft voice that says, I still believe. And when you start building your days on that voice, your actions become different. You stop measuring by what you see and start living by what you know deep down, that your steps are not in vain. So I want to ask you a simple question. What are you building your life on right now? Fear, doubt, routine, or are you building on the solid ground of positive faith, faith in your God, faith in your purpose, and faith in the power planted inside you, because when you start with faith, everything else finds its place. Plans gain clarity, strength finds you, and even the mountains you once feared begin to move. Fear has a curious way of disguising itself. It doesn't always announce itself with trembling hands or sleepless nights. Sometimes it shows up in more subtle forms: hesitation, procrastination, overthinking, avoidance. It masks itself as logic, calling itself caution or practicality. But underneath many of our delays, many of our missed opportunities, you'll find a common culprit: fear. And unless it's met with something stronger, it continues to drive the direction of our lives, quietly but powerfully. That's why positive faith isn't just a nice idea, it's a necessity, because positive faith transforms fear into courage. It doesn't eliminate fear entirely, but it puts fear in its rightful place, beneath the authority of truth. You see, fear is rooted in uncertainty. It grows in the shadows of what if. What if I fail? What if they reject me? What if this is too much? Fear thrives in the absence of clarity and chokes the imagination with worst-case scenarios. But faith, positive, deliberate, grounded faith, is rooted in something greater than circumstances. It's rooted in divine assurance, in purpose, in the unseen hand that holds your future. When you live by that kind of faith, fear loses its leverage. The world often tells us that courage is the absence of fear, but that's not true. Courage is the decision to act in the presence of fear, and positive faith is the fuel that makes that decision possible. It shifts the focus from danger to destiny. It takes your eyes off the problem and lifts them to the promise. Faith doesn't pretend the storm isn't real. It simply refuses to give the storm the final word. I've spoken to countless people who say they feel stuck in a job, stuck in a habit, stuck in a pattern of self-doubt. And in almost every case, it's not ability that's missing, it's faith. They've allowed fear to become the loudest voice in the room. They listen to it so often that it begins to sound like truth. But once you start feeding your faith more than your fear, everything begins to change. Because what you feed will grow. Feed fear, and it will dominate your thoughts. Feed faith, and it will begin to take the lead. Psychologically speaking, fear narrows the mind. It places the brain in a defensive state, limiting creativity, closing down risk, locking us into a survival mindset. But faith opens the mind. It invites the possibility of growth, of joy, of breakthrough. It allows you to think clearly because you're no longer reacting from panic, you're responding from peace. Positive faith brings the mind back into alignment with hope. Spiritually, this shift is even more profound. Scripture doesn't simply advise us to avoid fear, it commands us, do not be afraid. Why? Because fear is a contradiction to faith, not just emotionally, but theologically. Fear says, I'm alone. Faith says, God is with me. Fear says, this will never work. Faith says, all things are possible. Fear keeps us bound to what we've known. Faith invites us to what we've never imagined. Positive faith is not about blind optimism. It's not about ignoring challenges. It's about seeing the whole picture and still choosing to move forward. It's the kind of mindset that allows you to say, yes, the mountain is high, but I wasn't made to stay in the valley. It gives you the inner strength to look at the giants in your life and say, I'm not backing down. I've come too far to quit now. Now, fear doesn't just vanish overnight. It's been trained, often over years. But so can faith. You can train your mind to believe. You can renew your inner language. You can begin to speak possibility where you used to speak panic. That's the beauty of the human spirit. It's flexible, teachable, transformable. But it must be intentional. It doesn't happen by accident. Start small. Begin with one thought, one belief, one declaration of courage. Repeat it. Write it down. Say it aloud when fear begins to whisper. And most importantly, act on it, even if it's a small act, because every step you take in faith reinforces the voice of courage within you, and with time, that voice becomes your default, not the fear. I've learned this personally. I've stood in places where I had every reason to doubt, where the future looked uncertain and the path ahead was fogged with risk. But the moment I chose to believe, not based on how I felt, but based on what I knew in my spirit, everything began to shift. Not always around me, but certainly within me, and that inner shift always precedes the outer breakthrough. Fear can paralyze, but faith mobilizes. Fear limits, faith liberates. And when you live with positive faith, you don't just walk through life, you advance with purpose, even in the face of uncertainty. So let me leave you with this. Courage isn't found in a life without fear. It's found in the choice to believe anyway. And every time you choose faith over fear, you don't just move forward. You grow stronger, deeper, and more aligned with who you were truly meant to be. There's a principle that quietly governs every moment of our lives, though most people never pause long enough to recognize it. It's not loud, but it's deeply influential. It's the truth that what you believe deeply shapes what you experience daily. Not just what you hope for, not what you say when people are listening, but what you believe, consistently, internally, subconsciously. That's what sets the tone for your everyday reality. Your beliefs are not just passive thoughts floating around in your mind. They are the filter through which you see the world. They shape your perception, and your perception guides your reactions, decisions, and ultimately your outcomes. If you believe that the world is against you, you'll interpret neutral events as attacks. If you believe that people can't be trusted, you'll approach every relationship with suspicion. But if you believe that life is filled with opportunity, even in hardship, you'll begin to spot open doors where others only see walls. That's the power of belief. It creates the atmosphere in which your daily experience unfolds. I've often said that life is less about what happens to you and more about what happens in you. And nothing shapes what happens in you more than your core beliefs, especially your beliefs about God, about life, and about yourself. If those three beliefs are distorted, everything becomes unstable. But when those three are aligned with truth, everything else begins to find its order, not because the world suddenly becomes easy, but because you become clear. Let's take the belief about God, for instance. If you believe that God is distant, angry, or uninterested, you'll live with fear and hesitation. But if you believe that He is for you, guiding you, working behind the scenes for your good, even when things don't make sense, you'll live with a different level of confidence. You'll walk into each day expecting grace, expecting wisdom, expecting opportunities, and what you expect, you begin to recognize. That expectation changes your posture, your energy, and the way others respond to you. The same goes for your beliefs about yourself. Do you believe you're capable? Do you believe you're worthy of love, of growth, of success? Not because you're perfect, but because you're created with purpose. If that belief is present, you'll take risks, you'll show up, you'll persevere. But if you secretly believe you're inadequate, you'll shrink. You'll talk yourself out of opportunities before they even arrive. You'll sabotage your own momentum, not because you don't want to grow, but because deep down you don't believe growth is asterisk for you. Asterisk, that's why real transformation starts not with willpower, but with belief work. We're so focused on changing our behavior, but behavior always follows belief. What you believe sets the ceiling for how far you'll go. It defines what you think you deserve. It limits, or unleashes, your potential. You may want to live with boldness and peace and clarity, but if your beliefs are rooted in fear, guilt, or shame, those desires will always be met with resistance. Positive faith, then, is not just about feeling good. It's about believing good. Not in a shallow way, but in a deeply anchored way. It's the conviction that God is still in control, that your life still has meaning, and that you are not disqualified by your past. That kind of faith shifts your belief system, and when your beliefs shift, your daily experience transforms. Psychologists talk about the concept of confirmation bias. It means your mind naturally seeks out evidence to support what you already believe. That's how powerful belief is. If you believe you're always unlucky, you'll overlook every moment of grace. If you believe life is getting better, you'll start noticing small victories. It's not about delusion, it's about focus. Your beliefs are lenses, and when your lenses are colored with faith, hope, and possibility, the whole world begins to look different. I've seen people trapped for years, not by chains, but by beliefs. They believed they were too old to start over, too broken to be healed, too far gone to be used by God, but once those beliefs were challenged and replaced, their lives unfolded in miraculous ways, not because their circumstances changed first, but because their beliefs did. That's where the transformation begins. You don't have to wait for a miracle to start believing differently. In fact, it often works the other way around. You start believing, and then the miracles begin to move. You shift your belief from I can't to with God I can, from I'm stuck to I'm being prepared, from I've failed to I've learned. Those simple but powerful shifts change the energy you carry, the words you speak, and the way you live. And let me remind you, belief is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, consistent trust. Sometimes it's the whisper that says, I don't understand it all, but I'm choosing to believe something good is coming from this. That's enough to begin. That's where new roads are paved. So if your daily life feels heavy, stuck, or uninspired, ask yourself, what am I believing underneath it all? Because once you change your beliefs, you'll begin to change your behavior. And when that happens, you don't just live differently, you become different. The life you experience tomorrow is being shaped by the beliefs you hold today. Choose those beliefs with care, with courage, and above all, with faith. Most people imagine faith as something soft and emotional, a feeling that washes over you in moments of peace or desperation. But real, positive faith, the kind that transforms lives, is not just a feeling. It's a discipline. It requires strength, consistency, and an unshakable inner resolve. Positive faith demands mental focus in a world full of distraction, and the kind of spiritual training that says, even when I don't feel it, even when I don't see it, I will believe anyway. There's an old misconception that faith is something you either have or you don't, but that's not true. Faith is not a fixed asset, it's a muscle, and like any muscle, it must be exercised to grow. Every time you choose to trust instead of worry, to pray instead of panic, to declare hope instead of defeat, you are training your faith. And just like physical training, it doesn't always feel good. It requires effort, repetition, and sometimes pain, but the results are undeniable. Think about this. How much time each day do we spend training our doubts? We replay worst-case scenarios, we imagine failure. We dwell on what hasn't worked, what might go wrong, or how things used to be better, and every time we do, we're reinforcing a mental habit of fear. That doesn't mean we're weak, it means we're untrained. The mind, left unguarded, naturally gravitates toward worry, not because it's more logical, but because it's more familiar. But positive faith requires a different kind of mental discipline. It asks you to catch those thoughts before they spiral. It asks you to challenge them with truth. It asks you to build a new habit of focus, one that is aligned not with your feelings, but with your purpose, because feelings fluctuate, they rise and fall, but disciplined faith holds steady. It grounds you when life feels unsteady. There's a psychological truth here. The brain forms pathways based on repetition. The more you think a thought, the easier it becomes to think it again. That's why we don't just fall into negative thinking. We often slide into it without even noticing. It becomes our default. And the only way to change that default is through deliberate, intentional mental effort. You must feed your mind with what is good, true, and life-giving, not just once in a while, but daily, especially when circumstances seem against you. The Apostle Paul said, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." That's not a poetic phrase, it's a strategy. It means that your inner transformation will always begin in your thought life. Before anything changes on the outside, something must shift on the inside. And that shift comes through training. Training your mind to believe what God says over what fear says, what truth says over what your past says. This kind of training isn't always easy, especially in a world that constantly pulls your attention toward negativity, noise, and fear. But that's what makes discipline so valuable. It creates margin for truth to take root. It turns chaos into clarity, and when faith becomes your discipline, not just your emotional fallback, you become unshakable. I remember hearing someone say, "You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." In the same way, you don't rise to the level of your wishful thinking, you fall to the level of your trained beliefs. If your system is built on negative patterns, fear, or self-doubt, then when pressure comes, you'll default to those patterns. But if your system is built on consistent belief, if you've trained your heart and mind to return to faith, to truth, to purpose, then even when life shakes, you don't fall apart, you stay rooted, and let's be honest, discipline isn't glamorous. It happens in quiet moments when no one's watching. It's found in choosing the higher thought when you're tempted by the lower one, in getting back up when your thoughts tell you it's not worth it, in speaking life over your day before it even begins. Discipline is about making your beliefs louder than your circumstances. This is where positive faith becomes more than just a spiritual idea. It becomes a mental and emotional habit, a habit that says, "I will choose hope even when I feel tired. I will choose truth even when lies are easier to believe. I will speak victory even when the outcome is unclear." That's not pretending. That's spiritual maturity. And that kind of maturity builds a life that not only survives storms, but grows stronger because of them. When you realize that faith can be trained, that it's not about waiting for the right feeling, but about developing the right focus, you start living differently. You stop looking for inspiration and start building discipline. You stop asking, "Do I feel like trusting today?" and start declaring, "I choose to trust, regardless of how I feel." That shift, subtle, quiet, consistent, is what sets the faithful apart from the fearful. So ask yourself, what am I training for? Am I reinforcing worry or reinforcing faith? Because every thought, every choice, every response is part of your spiritual training. And over time, those daily decisions form a life that reflects the power of what you truly believe. Faith isn't just for the mountaintop, it's for the daily grind. And when it becomes your discipline, not just your desire, you don't just hold on. You rise up. You build a mind, a heart, and a life that cannot be shaken.